how do you define abstinence for clients and sort of the population that's listening?
Do you want to go, Jeannie?
I was going to say Rochambeau.
Well, that seems like it seems like an easy answer. And yet like, for example, it depends on if a client's in 12-step programs, their abstinence generally depends on what program they're in and how their program defines it. So it's this complex, like, for example, what's Sexaholics Anonymous defines sobriety, and what's the difference between sobriety and abstinence, but sobriety or abstinence as no sex with self or others. So masturbation is just included in the definition of, and then something like Sex Addicts Anonymous has a whole different definition that someone defines for themselves what's healthy, what's not. So I don't know how do you guys interpret it and deal with abstinence?
Right. So when we say of abstaining from something, it means that we're not doing that thing. Abstaining from alcohol, abstaining from drugs, it means we are, a person is not doing that thing. So abstinence from sex, then potentially that person has to define what sex is. So then we get into the whole piece of if someone says they're abstaining, are they also not masturbating? Are they masturbating or are they not masturbating? So that's another piece of this conversation, is when someone says I'm being abstinent, does that mean they're being celibate? And is that the same thing or not? My understanding is celibacy is absolutely no sexual contact of any kind. Is that your guys' definition of it?
Yeah, I would say that, but for me, celibacy is also an ongoing state, an ongoing experience, whereas abstinence, in the way that we're talking about it, is a period of time. And that period of time is really for the purpose of clinical intervention or biological intervention, especially when we're talking addiction. That neurological piece of changing the behavior patterns, changing some of that neurology, and abstaining from the sexual behaviors for a period of time. Because that way, well, two things, right? Oh, so many things. Now my head just blew up, Dan, darn it. Okay, because neurology, if we're not traveling down those neurological pathways and using our sex or sexual experiences to cope, we have to create other neural pathways. So that's one reason. Two, I think it also provides opportunity for an addict to understand the sexual energy and to create some mastery over sexual energy, of when is it appropriate to have that present and how do I rein it back in when it's not appropriate. Three, betrayed partners might feel safer knowing that the person with the compulsive sexual behavior issue is working on sexual energy and abstaining from sexual behavior, which again is treatment oriented. Did I list the one you were thinking of, Dan? Or are you thinking?
Yeah, no, I think so. It's interesting. When I think celibacy, I think of a relational component to it, because I could have, and we can define abstinence a little bit more, but I could theoretically have sexual contact with my partner, and it could be relational, but I could be abstaining from problematic sexual behaviors. So I could be doing both. To me, if I'm celibate, I would define it, I'm not sexual of self or others. And I actually see it as a period of time, but I think there's a relational piece, and I don't know what you guys do, but I think it gets, let's say I'm working with a person with the compulsive sexual behaviors. I usually will recommend an abstinence period at the beginning, just because we need that reboot time. And sometimes I think of like a food fast. We're not saying, because I think this is where we get sometimes seen as like we're anti-sex or something by suggesting this, which I don't think is the case. I think it's more giving our brains and bodies a chance to cope and find new ways of coping with life, as opposed to using sex and sexuality. But I think if I'm working with that person and I'm recommending this, how do I translate that to the partner? Is a partner on board? I mean, there's so many relational pieces to this, especially sometimes betrayed partners early on feel, if we're not having sex or not sexual, then they get anxious because like, well, if we're not doing it, then, I'm afraid that that he's going to go out and, do whatever he was doing before. So I'm just curious how you all handle that in terms of, if you do you even see celibacy as the same as having a relational component, and how do you manage that in a coupleship?